What I'd like to do is address 3 points rather briefly. The first two are two different variants of a concept about which I am totally unqualified to speak, and that is humility. And those are my friends that are laughing, by the way. And the third are some lessons of history. So humility. Let me suggest that there are two variations of humility that might be particularly germane to this conversation. The first is what I call informational humility, and the second is what I would describe as governmental humility. Informational humility. Let's look at the objective track record of most prognosticators as we enter into this crisis. How many people accurately foresaw the nature and the extent of the problems that we're facing today? Just want to take a minute and think about how many people got it right on the way in. Pretty small number. What makes us think that the vast majority of the analytic class that failed accurately to foresee the depth and the extent of our current problem on the way in now suddenly and remarkably possesses a crystal ball that gives them the ability to foretell and to map the future in a way materially better from the path that got us here? Okay? Now, a certain amount of humility about that situation is something that I've been advising a lot of my friends in Washington to have, and to be careful about the firmness with which many people hold their views. Now, this problem of informational humility is, I think, compounded by the fact that as a practical matter, we are now operating in an unprecedented range of economic variables. As several of the charts that my colleagues have put up, it shows you we've never seen the Fed behave like this. We've never seen our macroeconomy behave like this. And in this type of a situation, all of the models that people have traditionally estimated have been estimated over a different domain of variables. Forecast errors under these circumstances should be expected to be very high. Models that might work very well under traditional experiences just may not work as well when you are as far out of sample as we currently appear to be. The populace, however, does not like hearing the message that even the experts can't be confident that they know what they're doing, and therefore it's entirely rational and understandable at a certain degree that we project a certain level of confidence and certainty that we may not actually have. My good colleague and friend Bill Sharp did some calculations with some of the people at Financial Engines a while ago, and they calculated that basically the experience that we've seen recently is the kind of event that would occur roughly once every 2,000 years. Is that all right, Bill? Now, we can interpret that two ways. First, let's observe this is 2009, so the models are almost perfect, all right, in terms of explaining where we are. Or the other is perhaps we need to recalibrate our models and think a little bit more deeply. I like the 2009 point. It gives me greater comfort. So let's understand that navigating through the storm that we're in today might require as much, if not more, common sense and logic as formal modeling and traditional analytics. Second form of humility, governmental humility. As many of us around here occasionally like to observe, there may be practical limits to the ability of the government to solve everybody's problems under all circumstances. And thank you. And the problem very often is trying to explain to people who are not economists or haven't had the pleasure of seeing the government actually trying to do something, where these limits come from and what their roots are. So I've developed a bit of a story, an analogy, and let me share it with you. And it really tries to make everything, I think, directly comprehensible. Let's imagine a person who, over the course of a decade, fails to take care of himself and gains 160 pounds of weight, all right? At that point, the person suffers an acute cardiac event. Well, what are you going to do then? You're going to need the equivalent of government intervention in order to keep the patient alive through the acute event. And that, in a certain extent, is what we're experiencing now. But after the acute event is over and hopefully properly dealt with, you still have a patient who's morbidly obese and needs to lose 160 pounds of weight. And there's nothing that the acute intervention can do about that. This is the re-equilibration process that our economy has to go through. Our economy, for a wide variety of reasons, has to go on the macroeconomic equivalent of weight loss. And we all know from personal experience there are only two ways that you can do weight loss. All right, let's look at it in a personal way, and then we'll do the economic parallel. The first is you exercise more. All right, as a practical matter, that means that you actually wind up working harder. The second is you consume less. The economic parallel to that is you consume less. Okay? Let me know if I lose you on this. Are we okay? All right. So we are, as part of this equilibrating phenomenon, going to have a set of actions that the government can legitimately perform, but let's be modest and let's be accurate about what those are. And there's a whole bunch of re-equilibration in terms of housing prices going down, stock prices finding new values, about which the government can really do nothing to help. And if the government thinks that it can do something about that, the probability of it getting in the way and mucking up the process is non-trivial. Last, I'm done with humility now. So that was hard. Lessons of history, the lessons of history. Reinhardt and Rogoff have a terrific paper, very accessible, not a single partial differential equation in it at all. It's called The Aftermath of Financial Crisis. And what it does is it looks at the macroeconomic consequences of 18 major post-World War II banking crises, and it simply asks, what was the average of those experiences, and what can we learn from that? Now, the lesson here is what we're going through right now is clearly worse than any of those. So what we should expect is an experience worse than the average of what we've seen, in large part because each one of these situations was localized. It was either a national banking crisis, it was a regional banking crisis. It wasn't global in the form of the crisis we're facing now. But what did they find? First, negative growth. Isn't that a great phrase? Negative growth. Shrinkage, okay? Shrinkage typically lasts for 2 years. That would take us through 2009 and well into 2010 if this is just an average decline, and that's longer than many people in the current consensus suggest. All right, so if this is going to be worse than average, based on history, and I understand how history can fool you, all right, you should expect something worse than the forecast norm. Real inflation-adjusted price of housing typically declines by 36% over 5 to 6 years. This means that housing prices in the United States have roughly another 10% to go, and they certainly don't bottom before 2011. Equity prices typically decline by 55% in real terms over a 3.5-year period. We've already come precious close to that level of decline, and even so, you'd expect the stock market to be repressed for about 2 more years. Unemployment rises over 5 years with an average 7-point increase in unemployment rates. So history suggests that we are headed for double-digit unemployment with at least 2 to 3 more years of job loss. Central bank debt increases 85% in real terms in the 3 years following a banking crisis, primarily because of lost tax revenues. History implies, therefore, an additional $8 to $9 trillion of federal debt, plus we're going to have more because of the stimulus activities that we're undertaking. Their conclusion, and it's a conclusion with which I agree for far too long, official estimates of the likely trajectory of U.S. growth have been absurdly rosy and always behind the curve, leading to a distinctly underpowered response, particularly in restructuring the financial system. And that, I think, is a fair accurate of the situation we're in now. And then lastly, just an observation about nomenclature. Many people wonder, what do we call the current environment that we're in? My favorite name for it, and it's not original with me, is the not-so-great depression. Because we're clearly not at a level, all right, that compares with the Great Depression. And on the other hand, this is not so great an experience. So I'm happy to let this be known as the not-so-great depression and just leave it there.